welcome everybody. Thanks all for joining. I'm happy to be talking at PyData and for the opportunity to share my views mostly. So the name of my talk is Simplification as a Service. And going forward, a little bit about me. So I'm essentially a frustrated Python data scientist, in addition to what you've already heard about me. About this talk. So overall, I would summarize it as mostly a rant. There's some part common sense advice and some tips overall. Suitable audience would be software developers, data scientists, data engineers, pretty much everyone who writes code that's not meant for just personal consumption. And the code that you write today, maybe 6 months later, you don't understand that code. So any person who writes code that's not just throwaway code just to get it working right now and never having to look at it, it's for everyone. And hope you would find something useful. So before we really talk about the tech stack, I would like to take a moment and make you think about this quote. So just read. Yeah, pretty straightforward, right? Daddy, what did you bring that book that I don't want to be read to out of up for? So, and Dad is like, what? I don't understand. And basically the kid doesn't like this book and is asking his dad, why did you get this book? And that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make here, that you can simplify some things. You don't need to have a single long sentence in which all the information is there. And there's this concept in cognitive psychology, which is called our brain is a cognitive miser. So there's a cost to think. There's effort involved. There's some energy that you want to spend on it. There's obviously some time involved. So when the brain wants to do something and to get to doing that thing, it needs to use some tools, for example. Then the brain doesn't really want to spend any time trying to figure out how to use the tool. The tool should be apparent. The API, for example, should be obvious. Because when things are obvious, when things are clear, the feeling of competence is there. Otherwise, even when you're doing things right, you're like unsure that maybe there's something I'm doing wrong. Maybe there's some uncertainty around it. So this is what the brain is telling me. I just want to sit back and relax. Don't make me think. And just a side note, this is also the name of a very good book for UI UX developers. Moving on, getting to Python now, since we are at PyData. So Travis Oliphant is the founder of Anaconda, and he's also a co-founder of Focus. And people often always discuss about why Python is so popular, etc. And what he said was, Python lets you do a lot without demanding a lot of you. It lets you think, which is exactly what I said before. You want to do something, you're using some means to be able to do that. You don't really want to get into technicalities of that means. So you shouldn't be demanding too much from your user. You let them think about what their problem is that they're trying to solve. And that's what makes Python very popular, which is something I really agree to. It's almost like English when you start learning Python. Of course, there are many technicalities which you encounter when you have some experience with it. But more or less, it's nice. The UI experience overall, I would say, is pretty nice. That's why we are here. That's why the ecosystem is thriving so much. But it's not always so simple or straightforward. Let's talk about some entry barriers which might be affecting, say, your product or just Python as itself for greater adoption. there's this quote, which I took from the Zen of Python, which is, there should be one, and preferably only one, obvious way to do it, right? You should make the code clear. The user should have access to some clear, accessible API, which is obvious. You don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure things out, juggle things here and there. But of course, the first thing that you do when you set up your project or you check out some nice Python library is to set up your Python environment. And that's already asking a lot, because there's not one way to do it. There are like so many ways of doing it. Maybe Conda is not even there. No, Anaconda is there. But yeah, and if you use so many different ways, you can use virtual Ven wrapper, pipenn, poetry, Conda, whatnot. You can install using pip, app, brew, and every time you use something, if you install the same package, for example, with different ways, they have their own paths, and you can mess something up, and a few months later, you're like, I don't remember how I installed this one, and stuff like that. So it can be very, very confusing for starters. And sure, most of you, I assume, are experienced, much more experienced than me. But yeah, for someone who's just starting out, it's kind of off-putting. You don't really want to have to think about Python path, and yeah, it's a bit difficult initially, I would say. And the junior developers who just start fresh, maybe just out of college or something, usually you see them asking the seniors, I don't understand. My environment is not working properly. And it's not just them. I mean, today itself, when I was trying to set things up for the demo, I struggled with setting up my Jupyter, which I love, of course. Moving on. Okay, so there's this library request, which I find personally very elegant, and just the API is nice. Everything you want is clear. You don't have to think so much. Yes, it's about HTTP requests. Exactly. And this snapshot I've taken from PyPy, the version 2.7.0. And let's look at how they want to describe the request repository and how they describe the project in general. Python HTTP for humans. Exactly. We write code for humans. We want it to be read. We want it to be used by other humans. For machines, we have machine code. That's not the point, right? We want our tools that we build, our machine learning tools, or even simple utilities to be used by humans. It should be easy or simple for other humans to be used, not code developers who would be happy to deep dive into some obscure end of your code base and figure it out for you, open a PR already. It's for regular humans. Another interesting bit from the same snapshot that I shared with you is, this description. So yeah, that's what they say. Most existing Python modules for sending HTTP requests are extremely verbose and cumbersome. Python's built-in URL lib2 module provides most of the HTTP capabilities you should need, but the API is thoroughly broken. It requires an enormous amount of work, even method overrides, to perform the simplest of tasks. Things shouldn't be this way, not in Python. Well, not just in Python. Things shouldn't be this way, period. Things should be simple. And there's a reason now requests is kind of ubiquitous. I mean, yeah, I had heard about requests before I even knew about URL lib2, because it adds value in terms of this simplification, this nice API, this nice tool that you can use without having to read the GitHub repository of how it's supposed to work, etc. I hope I get across my intent. I'm not bashing any repo on any of the examples. I'm just obviously very frustrated and want to get across the message that yeah, you may build a very cool library, but unless it's easy for the users to use it and easy for other developers to chime in, the traction might be a bit difficult. Let's take an example of this very cool library that a friend of mine actually showed me when I described the idea of this talk to him. So this is GPT Neo X, very nascent library, of course, so we shouldn't be expecting too much. But what it says is this is an implementation of model parallel GPT-3-like models on GPUs based on Deep Speed library. It's designed to be able to train models in the hundreds of billions of parameters, or even larger. This repository is under development and may change rapidly without warning. Okay, yeah, we get that. And requirements, everything you need to get started. Running the code can be installed via pip. So you can just do pip install the requirements and you're good to go. That's what I like. And if you have a look at their GitHub, yeah, they do give you some pointers. So you should have to make sure that you're in the environment with Python 3.8 or later. Gotcha. You should have Torch, so PyTorch installed, and then you just run this requirements txt. Okay, then there's you may, but may sounds like it's optional. So let's see how it goes. I'll switch to the demo now, and I hope you can see it. Now, one thing about this is, since it took quite a bit of time, I've already done the steps and I would just like to show it to you now. So added Python version, okay, Python 3.8, which is good. Pip freeze, torch, yes, we have Python torch. It talked about it should be more than 1.8.0, so we're already good there. Now let's just do pip install the requirements. Let's wait. Are we ready to go? Okay, quite some requirements. Uh-oh, I see an error, exit status 1. But I don't understand what's going on here. There's some configuration missing here. And even then it's still continuing. It's doing some more checking. So lots of red blob stuff and failed. Building wheel for MPI for PY. Okay, there's more. And then I don't basically understand what's going on here because it's, yeah, just talking about MPI programs not being able to import. Now, what I then could do is basically check out this library and see what it says about this CUDA-Py, which they had described earlier here, that you may need to change the version of this. So this gives me a hint that maybe it has something related to with CuPy CUDA. Okay, so I look for the repository and I search for CUDA-Py and I find this obscure file which says 1-bit Adam. And there I find CUDA-Py and it asks me to install something like this, which also doesn't work. So I basically search for this on Google, and this is what I find about CuPy, that these are the requirements that we need. So the first requirement is NVIDIA CUDA GPU, some CUDA toolkit, and Python, these versions above. So the first requirement, NVIDIA CUDA GPU, is not there in my laptop, but that's not at all clear from the description about GPT Neo X. Clearly, you can install everything you need to get started running the code can be installed by a pip, except an NVIDIA CUDA GPU. We are not there yet. Pip doesn't help us with installing NVIDIA GPU yet. So that's the point. Now, I don't think I'm ever gonna even try using this library, because this is basically my guess. I tried to look at the README, went to the library that I did need, and there I found that there's a requirement that my laptop currently doesn't satisfy. that does not mean that that will already fix it, because the error message that I got, I don't understand it at all. But yeah, that's what I'm talking about. If the user is, if a new developer has to spend more than a few minutes or 10 minutes or something to be able to get the setup ready, and if they want to be say contribute as a developer, and if they want to run the tests, if it takes more than half hour to have like just check it out, install everything and run all the tests and see, okay, the build is fine, they're not going to use it. I mean, you'll try to find another substitute for this library unless it adds so much new utility that you can't find anyone else. Only then would you take the pain of going through all the trouble to have a working setup. Yeah, so just to corroborate more such experiences, I found this post on Hacker Post. So beginner Python user, and he needs to rant, he or she, I don't know, or they. Yeah, so I've been doing a bit of Python the last few weeks for some image processing and computer vision tasks using OpenCV and NumPy. I have to say, altogether, it's pretty miserable developer experience. Another thing, API usage errors, even those where invariants are checked at runtime, are ridiculously under-informative. OpenCV, for example, does quite a bit of runtime sanity checking on the shape and type of arguments of its methods, but somehow even simple details as to which parameter is the cause of the error don't get reported in the stack trace, severely increasing the cognitive load required to identify the mismatch, which is what was the initial point. Not fun when multiple arguments to an API are the result of a chain of NumPy magic data munching. This may be an OpenCV complaint more than Python, but it's very popular, and it's very difficult to find a user library which has a big user base but a shitty interface or README, etc. Because most of these libraries which have a bigger user base, either they had a great user experience already, which led to their adoption, or they invested heavily once they got some traction. Okay, and how can you make the user experience of people using your AIML or even just regular Python tool better? Is, for example, using informative errors. Let's take an example of Python. Since it's PyData, we start with ranting about Python. So I have a very simple file in which, I have a dictionary A, which has two elements, foo and bar, with some values. And I forgot to close the curly braces here. And then when I run it, I get this error on the next line. You see what I'm talking about? The syntax error is on the next line. And I'm sure we are all used to this, like people who have background from other languages like C++ are also always sure, okay, there's a colon missing, must be in the less, if there's this colon missing, should be in the previous line. But for someone who's just starting out, it's very confusing. And let's just say it's not nice. But Python 3.8 is what I had used here. And Python, actually, the most recent Python version, 3.10, has already made things simpler for us. So they already listened to all the complaints about this. So this got released in October 2021, actually, I think. And when I run the same file, here I get the syntax error in the line where the error is. So I forgot to close this curly braces, which is what we want. And of course, not a lot of people here can change so much about Python interpreter, but these things happen in the libraries we worked on all the time. Sure, in open source, and especially the libraries which have some decent developer base, these things are not so often. But when you're building something, or maybe when you're building something internally in your company, and like, yeah, there are these 10 smart people, they would understand. I don't need to worry about fixing things to like making things idiot proof, so to say, because they're smart people. It doesn't work like that, because they might leave, new people might join. You don't want to spend the new folks you don't want to spend like hours explaining simple stuff to new folks. You want them to get started quickly and really understand what's the problem your product is trying to solve, instead of getting into these technicalities. So yeah, the point I'm trying to make is make the flow as fluid as possible for your users, make the user experience great. It should be delightful. Okay, next thing that you can do, apart from adding informative errors, is you failed clearly. I'll tell you what I'm trying to say. So show me upfront what is wrong. So imagine that there's a library, and you're a developer, or we just want to contribute to open source or something like that, and you run the tests. So that's the first thing you do. You check it out, you install it locally, and you run tests and see if the build is fine. And then it's not fine, let's just say. And instead of really telling you what's not fine, they give you something like this. So you run PyTest and they say, your test failed. Too bad. You can find out why here in some random compilation of characters, that this is the name of the log file. You have to go find it out, and good luck if you can understand the log. And to be honest, this is what I've seen in the companies that I work for. This happens, and this happens all the time. Sure, you won't find so much of this in open source, because you want the developer experience to be much nicer there. And in companies, since you have these experts who have been working on those repos for years, they don't really bother taking care of newbies so much, because they know only experts are working. And if you think this is worse, it can be much worse. So one of the tools that I work on right now, when you run tests, it fails. So you get to know something is failed, and then you don't know where to find logs. And the way to find logs is to go to the README, because then it's explained that if you run this test, then here's the log. If you run this test, then this is the log. Which, when I just started out, when I did like the first feature development, I was like, oh my God, where am I? And these things happen. I mean, it's not just everyone wants to have good user experience, but it's about priorities. You prioritize feature development, that if we build this feature, more customers will be using your product. But maybe just make things easier for them to use, and a lot of morons like me would already be on board. Yeah, not just fail clearly, you fail early. And let's just take an example for this. So this is a very simple example, just to get across this point. I have this Python notebook that you should be able to see. So there's this function, long computation, and there's another function in which you're validating something. And basically, let's just assume there's some long running step. Here I'm just using sleeping for 3 seconds, but I'll just say what happens. So only after 3 seconds of having run this function, long computation, do I get the assertion error for this. And then I can see, okay, dot should not be in the name. So, I mean, this sounds very simple. So every one of you will say, no, I would never do this. That's stupid. I've never seen this. But I can give you an example of something that I had experienced in at my work. So there's something called simulations that we run for our customers for different parameters. Not so important, but usually since the data is like many months of data or something like that, these simulations run like for hours. So the work that I was doing, that set of simulation, like for that amount of data, it was taking like 8 hours. So what I used to do is trigger a simulation just before going to work, going home, and then next morning I would have the results which I could analyze and so on. And basically, we had a function like long computation, which was called run simulation, and we were reading the data and doing all kind of long running computation. And in the end, we were writing the data set for analysis, for further analysis, using a very nice library. And the problem is, since that library was doing some validation on the some of the inputs. So so there's some, for running simulation function, there were a couple of inputs which were not really needed for the long running computation, but only when we write it, which happens to be analogous to this function. And for the validation happened much later than the long running stuff. So the next day when I came into work waiting for the results to analyze them, I would see an error, which I could have avoided if I had known about that error already as soon as I triggered it. To talk about that example, so there's this open source library called Catotech, which is very nice, in which you can store big data in form of Parquet files on in flat format on store and whatever. It's very nice, very useful. Use it a lot. In fact, it was developed by Blue Yonder originally. And let's look at this. So this is some pandas data frame that I created, and I want to store this data frame as a data set using this library. And so how do I use it? I have to provide a couple of things. So store dataset UUID. UUID, what is that? Let's have a look. So just to give you some background, so there's this UUID stands for Universal Unique Identifier. And it's a string, it's a way of generating IDs in the form of strings. So it contains hexadecimal. And I think that's all you need to understand. I'm trying to say here. And okay, yeah. So it expects a UUID here, but let's see what happens if I don't provide a UUID. I use this, which is clearly not a standard UUID, doesn't have the 8, whatever format. It also includes underscore instead of hyphen. So does it work? Well, I'm getting some metadata. So it seems like it's stored. Let's check. Yeah, I am also able to read it. So it got stored even though the standard are not being followed. Maybe the nice thing that they did was to take care of the UUID and make it more readable. But if I change a bit of this string to be this, and then I get an error because the validation is different. I guess I have to speed up. Yeah, so this was the second demo in which I explained this, some links that you can refer to. Another tip would be, if you have a CLI-based tool, would be when you make these typos, it would be good to have, do you mean this argument? So like in Git, if you write git splash, it tells you, do you mean git stash? So I would talk a little bit about accessible documentation for 30 seconds, I'm sorry. So if you have good documentation, it makes it easier for users. It also makes it easier for you yourself, because then you don't have to spend time to onboard new users. You should ideally include tutorials, how to guides, and references, and they have different purposes: learning, problem, and information orientation. And there are different tools like Sphinx, doctests, etc., which can make things much easier for your users. Your documentation should be easy to navigate. And thank you all for joining. I'm sorry I couldn't show you more demos about the talk, but I would be happy to connect on Gather or Slack. Thank you all.